Have you ever wondered why psychological horror shakes us to our very core, leaving us with chills, yet we can't help but crave for more? Today, we're going to explore this intriguing world, where fear is not just about what lurks in the shadows, but the shadows lurking within our own minds. Psychological horror, as a genre, is like a mirror held up to our deepest, darkest fears. It's not about blood and gore or monsters under the bed, but rather the monsters that could potentially reside within us. It's a genre that taps into our primal fears, making us question our own sanity, our own perceptions of reality. Unlike traditional horror, which relies heavily on physical threats and explicit violence to scare us, psychological horror takes a more subtle route. It's a master of suspense, creating an atmosphere of dread and uneasiness. It's a creeping sense of something not quite right, a nagging suspicion that all is not as it seems. This genre, dear friends, is all about the mind. It's about the power of suggestion, the fear of the unknown, the terror of what might be lurking in the depths of our own subconscious. It forces us to confront the darker aspects of our psyche, the parts of ourselves we'd rather keep hidden. In psychological horror, the environment is often an extension of the character's mind. The protagonist's perception of their surroundings becomes distorted, making it difficult for them to distinguish between what's real and what's a product of their imagination. This blurring of reality and fantasy is what makes psychological horror so compelling and, dare we say, addictive. And it's not just about scaring us. It's about making us think, making us question. It's a genre that leaves a lasting impression long after the credits have rolled. It's a genre that stays with you, haunts you, makes you look over your shoulder when you're alone in the dark. So, let's dive deeper into the elements that make up this spine-chilling genre. Imagine being alone in a vast, eerie space with no one to hear your cries. Sounds terrifying, right? We all experience a shiver down our spine at the thought of being isolated, cut off from the world, and left to our own devices. This fear is so universal. Let's think about some of the most chilling examples. Consider the classic horror narrative, The Shining. The isolation of the Overlook Hotel, away from civilization, trapped in a snowstorm, heightens the sense of impending doom. It's not just a physical isolation, but a psychological one too, as the protagonist descends into madness, cut off from any semblance of sanity or reality. Or take the eerie tale of The Woman in Black. The protagonist, Arthur Kipps, is stranded in an isolated house, surrounded by marshes and haunted by a vengeful ghost. The isolation here is palpable, a character in its own right, intensifying the terror and suspense. Then there's the modern masterpiece, A Quiet Place, where a family is forced into isolation to survive against sound-sensitive creatures. The isolation here is a cruel necessity, a tool for survival that also breeds fear and desperation. In each of these examples, isolation serves to heighten fear. It strips away the comforting illusion of safety in numbers, leaving the characters, and by extension, the audience, feeling vulnerable. It creates a sense of helplessness, a lingering dread that there's no one to turn to, no one to help. It's a potent reminder of our own mortality, our own insignificance in the grand scheme of things. Isolation, indeed, is a powerful tool in psychological horror, magnifying our fears and leaving us feeling helpless. What could be more horrifying than losing your grip on reality, slowly descending into madness? This question leads us into the dark and winding corridors of psychological horror. Here, the mind isn't just the scene of the crime, but the perpetrator as well. The terror doesn't lurk in the shadows or under the bed. It's inside us, gnawing at the corners of our sanity, pushing us toward the precipice of madness. Psychological horror often pivots around characters who are caught in this terrifying dance with their own minds. They teeter on the edge of sanity, never quite sure if they're losing their grip on reality or if the horrors they're experiencing are indeed real. This ambiguity adds a chilling sense of unease to the narrative, wrapping us in a cocoon of fear and uncertainty. Think of the character in The Telltale Heart, who is driven to murder by the incessant beating of a heart he believes he hears. Or the protagonist of The Shining, who spirals into homicidal madness, influenced by the malevolent spirits of a haunted hotel. Their descent into insanity isn't immediate. It's a slow, creeping dread that intensifies with each passing moment, heightening the horror and keeping us on the edge of our seats. In psychological horror, the line between reality and illusion is often blurred. This plays into our deepest fears, the fear of losing control, of not being able to trust our own minds. The characters' struggle with their sanity mirrors our own insecurities, making us question our perceptions and doubt our understanding of the world around us. The theme of madness adds a disturbing layer to the horror. It takes us on a terrifying journey into the human psyche, revealing just how fragile our grip on sanity can be. It's a chilling reminder that the monsters we fear aren't always out there in the darkness. Sometimes they're inside us, hidden in the deepest, darkest corners of our minds. Madness, thus, adds a disturbing layer to the horror, making us question our own perceptions. Aren't we all afraid of what we cannot see or understand? The dread of the unknown is an essential element of psychological horror, a theme that plays on our most primal fears and instincts. It isn't just about what's hiding in the dark corners of the room, or the eerie silence that follows a chilling scream. No, it's the uncertainty, the inexplicable, the unseen that truly terrorizes us. In psychological horror, the fear of the unknown is not merely a plot device. It's a psychological trigger that sets off a chain reaction of fear and anxiety within us. The unseen enemy, the unidentified threat, the unexplained phenomenon. These are the things that unsettle us the most. They tap into an instinctive part of our psyche that fears what it cannot comprehend, making the horror more psychological than physical. Think about it. The anticipation of a threat is often far more terrifying than the threat itself. It's the creaking door that slowly opens to an unseen hand, the shadowy figure that's just out of sight, the whispers in the wind that you just can't quite make out. These elements don't just scare us, they make us question our surroundings, our reality, and even our sanity. The dread of the unknown also magnifies our sense of vulnerability. When we don't know what we're up against, we feel defenseless, helpless. This vulnerability, this feeling of being exposed to an unknown threat, intensifies the horror experience. It's not just about the fear of what might be out there. It's about the fear of what we might not be capable of handling, of what might be too much for our fragile minds to bear. In the end, psychological horror is not just about ghosts, monsters, or supernatural entities. It's a genre that delves into the deepest, darkest corners of our minds, exploiting our inherent fear of the unknown. It's about making us question, making us doubt, making us fear. The fear of the unknown indeed heightens the horror, making us dread what might be lurking in the shadows. So, what makes psychological horror so captivating and terrifying at the same time? Well, we've delved into the chilling depths of this genre, and it's time to bring our exploration to a close, wrapping up the horror, so to speak. Psychological horror thrives on the elements of isolation, madness, and fear of the unknown. These themes serve as the driving forces behind the genre's ability to grip us, to make our hearts race and our palms sweat as we journey into the abyss of our deepest fears. Isolation, for instance, is a powerful tool in the psychological horror toolkit. It amplifies the vulnerability of characters, leaving them helpless and cut off from the world they know. This isolation, whether physical or emotional, fosters a sense of desperation and heightens the terror. It forces us to confront the chilling reality of being alone, a fear ingrained in our very nature. Then comes the spiral into madness, the slow but relentless deterioration of a character's mental state serves to unsettle us, making us question our own sanity. The blurred line between reality and hallucination, the shifting sands of perception, they all add to the disquiet. In the end, we're left questioning what's real and what's not, a terrifying thought indeed. And finally, the fear of the unknown, the unease that comes from not knowing what lurks in the shadows, the dread of what might be hiding just around the corner. This fear is perhaps the most primal of all, a remnant of our ancient survival instincts. It adds an element of suspense, keeping us on edge, anticipating the next scare. In the end, psychological horror resonates with us because it taps into our deepest, most primal fears. It leaves us questioning, leaves us terrified, and yet leaves us wanting more. Its allure lies in its ability to make us face our fears, to confront the darkness within and without. And that, dear friends, is the captivating terror of psychological horror.